God of Buddhism. Today we have an excerpt from the Zen Eye, a collection of Zen talks by Sokean. The God of Buddhism is the God of wisdom. In Buddhism, the Buddha means one who knows, the knower. One who knows one's own wisdom is Buddha. Our eyes, which have the faculty of seeing, our ears, which have the faculty of hearing, our other senses, smell, taste, touch, all are manifestations of the power of knowing. So our sense organs are the eyes of Buddha. Every one of us is Buddha. However, Mr. So-and-so is not Buddha, but our persons are Buddha. The Buddhist believes in a pantheistic God. This personal pantheistic God is God nature in me, in you, in all sentient beings, in everything. There is no such word in the Orient as individual. The Buddhist believes that souls are not created by God one by one, but that each is a drop of water in the ocean of soul. The ocean of soul is existence. It is being, existing from beginningless beginning to endless end. So there is no creation of the universe and no destruction of the universe. Each wave of the ocean has its own character, its own shape, its own power and its own velocity, yet all waves are nothing but the body of water that is the sea. Each individual has his or her own keynote and characteristics, yet all individuals are nothing but waves in the ocean of soul. So for those who haven't heard of Sokean before, perhaps just a few words to introduce who he is. So he was a Zen master who lived in New York. He travelled over from Japan in the early part of the 20th century, and he was admonished by his own master to travel around America for about 10 years, getting to know the American psyche, and then he was told to settle down and open a zendo, which is what he did in Greenwich Village before the Second World War. And he taught there for quite a number of years, and he also founded the first Zen Institute in America, and that's still there in New York City. Also he married a second time. In fact, he married an American woman called Ruth Fuller Everett. She became Ruth Fuller Sasaki. And Sokean, during the Second World War, he was interned, as were the Japanese in America, and he didn't live very long after he had been released, dying shortly after the Second World War in the late 40s, upon which his wife, who had obviously literary executor to him, she moved to Japan, and she opened a small temple for foreigners who wanted to come to Japan to train. It was a sort of breaking in temple before people went up to the main monasteries in Kyoto. And in fact, it's where my own teacher, Venerable Myokyo-ni, Master Dayu Myokyo, she went to Ruth Sasaki's temple and was broken in, as she said, spent I think a couple of years there before going on up to Daitokuji, where she did her main training under Master Sesso and Master Sojun. So we have a connection with Sokean. The other reason that I personally am very fond of his writings is simply because he taught in the West, and he did know the Western psyche, and some of the questions that he raised, I think, are still very relevant to us now here in the West, those of us who are Zen practitioners. And this particular book, The Zen Eye, is a collection of his sermons, which were meticulously recorded during his lifetime, and then these were published posthumously at the end of the last century. So this comes from a chapter called The Knower, the God of Buddhism, which is the title of this talk. And as we can see, he's referring to the Buddha in a very specialist way, or in a very specialist Mahayana way, certainly. So most people are probably familiar with the person of the Buddha, who lived 2,500 years ago. So, a prince, left the palace, turned the wheel of the Dharma, and then died in the Sala Grove, aged 80. and he's known as the founder of what we call Buddhism, which has spread throughout many countries and has now come west and includes obviously our own school, the Zen school. So that's one body of the Buddha, but the Buddha also became somewhat more cosmic as well. There was this development of the teaching of the Buddha nature. The Buddha nature is seen as being inherent in all living beings, and then there's the Dharma nature, which is inherent in all reality. So those are not two things, by the way. They are interconnected, and emptiness is the nature of both the Buddha nature and the Dharma nature as well, of all things. But suffice to say that the Buddha nature itself is also called the Buddha. So we refer to the Buddha or the Buddha nature or the true face or the original face, and the heart Buddha. You know, the own heart is Buddha, and that comes from a famous Zen master called Master Baso, who said that the ordinary heart is Buddha, or heart is Buddha, to make it brief. So we also refer to the heart as well as the reflecting heart, the heart mirror, it's sometimes called, and the heart Buddha. And both of these refer to, obviously they're metaphors, but they refer to the quality of consciousness, and that is really what this particular passage is about. And it ties in quite nicely because the etymology of our word, the English word consciousness, obviously comes from the Latin cognoscere, meaning to know. So consciousness is that which knows, which ties in very much with Sokian's The God of Buddhism is the knower. So basically what he's saying is that consciousness is Buddha in its purest form. Pure meaning empty, empty of I, empty of delusion of I. In the absence of the delusion of I, the nature of consciousness is Buddha nature. So that's what sort of ties these together. So what does it mean? What is this sort of knower? What is this sort of knowing? Well, he refers to it, doesn't he? Because he says that we have the sense consciousness, we have the consciousness of seeing in the eye, hearing in the ear, tasting on the tongue, and so on through the physical senses. But we also have, in Buddhism, we have a sixth sense, which is the sense of mental cognition. The sense that perceives thoughts, that perceives emotion, that perceives mental objects like memories or will, intentions, and so on and so forth. These are mental objects, and to be seen, to be known, is consciousness. So remembering, intending, forgetting, emoting, thinking, all these things are the consciousness that is allied to it. And if you think about when we practice our Zen, for example, what do? We sit down on a cushion or a chair, we hold the body up, we have the hands in the lap, we have the mouth closed, and we're breathing in and out through the nose with the eyes sort of slitted and looking down. And usually to begin with, we breathe. The breath itself is the object of meditation. That's what we give ourselves into. That becomes the anchor, so to speak, for the meditation. And if the mind drifts, if the heart drifts off into thought streams and becomes embroiled in a daydream or fantasy or just a thought stream, planning or whatever, then as soon as that's realized, we come back to the anchor, to the object of meditation, which is the breath. Now, some people use the breath, the out breath in particular. Others put a count on the out breath. That's what my own school does. But both of them, produce this sort of what's called one-pointed concentration or one-pointed awareness, one-pointedness, we could say, where the heart begins to sort of settle down. And quite often what happens is that the count drops off. For example, and there's just the sort of a quiet openness. And this consciousness, this quiet openness, is the quality of the knower that's being referred to here. This is the getting down to the real basis of the heart Buddha itself. without the all the thought configurations, as they're known, the thought coverings, as Master Hakuin refers to them. So into that, onto that, because a mirror, as I said, it's also called a heart mirror, and consciousness acts like a mirror. Consciousness and a mirror reflects, doesn't it? And if you imagine that that consciousness isn't actually a mirror, it's the reflecting quality of the mirror. So you shouldn't think of even consciousness is not an object, like a mirror is an object. It's the fact that the mirror reflects. That's why the heart mirror is called a heart mirror. So consciousness is not a thing, it's a reflecting. And what does it reflect? Well, it reflects objects of consciousness, as we've said, sights and sounds and tastes and smells, and also the mental objects as well, as we've already sort of gone through. So consciousness, this experiencing of, is also this knowing as well. So this is the knowing that Sokian refers to, and this, as long as a being is alive, as long as you and I are alive, then this sense consciousness is always functioning, whether we're aware of it or not, whether we're conscious or unconscious. That is, if we're fast asleep, for example, sense consciousness still continues to function. If you're lying in bed and the room gets cold, and your duvet falls off you, your hand will, even in sleep, will reach down and grab the covers and pull you up. Will pull it up over you, and the skin on your arms will get goosebumps. The hairs will stand up because the body's still regulating temperature and everything else that's sort of going on. And what's more is if you're fast asleep, as you know, when you're fast asleep, there is no awareness. There's no waking awareness, is there? And there's no awareness that one exists. One's not aware that one is lying in bed. One's not aware of time passing. One's not aware of the car that just drove past, if it didn't actually wake us up, and so on. One's not aware of even voices in the other room, or rain on the window, or even if we're heavy sleepers, we might even sleep through a thunderstorm. So there's no awareness, there's no one there to be aware of any of these things, any of this existence at all. And then in the morning the alarm goes off, and if I say I've been in deep sleep, it wakes me up. But what wakes me up? If I'm not there, then what is waking me up? It's useful to ponder that a little bit, because we take these things for granted. But actually, when we begin to look, we can see that there are holes in this self-belief. There's holes in the self-belief that I am the doer, that I am always the one that is doing. If there's seeing, then I am the seer. If I'm hearing, then I am the hearing. But in Buddhism, this isn't the case. There's seeing, there's hearing. There doesn't need to be a subject who does these things. And this is what we also realize in our practice. This is why, again, Venerable Myokyoni used to speak of to give myself away into the doing. And rather than to keep manifesting the delusion that I am the doer, doing the walking, doing the thinking, doing the typing, doing the clearing up. Instead, that I give myself away. In other words, I forget myself into the doing. So the doing does the doing. The sweeping does the sweeping. The washing up does the washing up. The thinking does the thinking. And actually, this coincides with our experience. If we're used to sitting zazen, meditation, then we know, don't we? That, thinking comes in unbidden. It's not that I choose to think. More often than not, I am trying to meditate, and suddenly I find that I've been carried away by thoughts for 5 minutes, and then have to come back to the object of meditation. So it's not I who is doing the thinking. The thinking is an unconsciously driven process that is seeded karmically to continue. It has nothing to do with I, and of course, as the Buddha said, I am a delusion. So how could it have anything to do with I? It is a process that has nothing to do with I, really. Even I am just an object that comes up and goes down. As we've seen in deep sleep, I am not there. And actually, quite often during the day, I'm not there as well. I mean, if I am given into what at this moment is being done, then I am not there. There's just the going with. But then suddenly something happens and a thought comes up and says, oh, I don't fancy doing this now. Someone says, oh, Martin, will you, it's your turn to do the washing up. And I think, oh, I don't really want to. So I say, oh, I'll do it later. There I am. I'm picking and choosing now. I'm judging, and I'm deciding whether or not I want to do something. In other words, and that means that I'm standing apart from the situation. In order to judge a situation, I have to stand apart from it. So the situation now becomes an object, and I become a subject. And that subject we attach the label I to. This is what I want, or this is what I think, or this is my opinion. This is what I think should happen or shouldn't happen. There's that standing apart that happens. But this is a consciousness also, and this is why there are different names for consciousness in Buddhism. So, for example, the sense consciousness we've been talking about, the hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, whether conscious or unconscious, in fact, this is called vijnana. So vijnana simply arises when sense data comes in through the sense doors. Then sense consciousness arises. That's what's known as the 18 dhatu. As I said, there are 6 sense bases. So the sense object, the sensing, the sense itself, and then the consciousness that is a lie to that self, that's 3. So 3 times 6 is 18. Those are the 18 dhatu. And the Buddha called this the all as well, the ocean of the all. This is all that there actually is. And so there's that, and that functions anyway, regardless. It never gets switched off until the day we die. Even people in comas, it's known that people lying in hospital in a coma can still sense things, even though they may not be able to respond to them physically anymore. So yeah, people come out of comas and report that they were able to hear and see what was going on in the room with them. So on top of that then, or in addition to, or as well as, maybe not on top of, but as well as, there's another form of consciousness, which is conscious awareness. This is what perhaps more aligned to the Sanskrit term sati. We had vijnana for sense consciousness. Sati generally means mindfulness, but it basically means awareness. This is the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 foundations of awareness, or 4 foundations of mindfulness, as it's actually called. And this is the being aware of something. So sense consciousness is coming in, for example, and there's an awareness of it. As we said, in sleep, or if I'm very distracted in a daydream, I may not hear the dripping tap. Or the cat meowing or whatever, if I'm really gone, even though it is coming in through the sense gates and it is being registered as well in the heart, there may not be actual awareness of it. So that awareness is called sati. So there's a difference there. Sati, and indeed the awareness of myself also tends to arise in sati. I am, because there is this awareness of hearing or seeing or touching, I see myself as separate. I take the delusion takes the extra step. Instead of recognizing that this consciousness is simply differentiated parts of a continuum, not a separate entity in its, or a thing in itself, the mistake arises of the delusion of I. And so even though I am not there from time to time, as we've said, it doesn't matter, so to speak. The the thought objects supported by the emotional household maintains a view, a wrong view, obviously, of a separate entity, which is called I, me, myself, with my likes, my dislikes, my opinions, particularly. We looked at opinions quite recently, actually. So these certainly are used to maintain this delusion of a separate entity. And this is how it goes in Buddhism. So this is why in the practice of meditation, the thought coverings are allowed to rest, as it were, to disappear, and there's a recognition, therefore, that there is this underlying consciousness that is ever present. Actually, it's ever present, and of course, it extends beyond that a little bit as well. I mean, because we could say, well, what is consciousness? The problem is that, of course, when I think about consciousness, I'm always thinking about a thing that I'm calling consciousness. So I say, does it exist outside of me, or does it exist inside of me? But if we look at the Buddha's teaching of the 18 Dhatu, where the 18 Dhatu is actually the schema of the heart or the mind. So the heart or the mind takes in, the sense objects, the sense and the sense consciousness. It is seen, and the important thing is that those three are interdependent. They are completely interdependent for their own individual existences. This is what Sokyan is referring to later on when he says, in the Orient, the word individual does not exist. What he means there is not that there aren't individuals. Of course there are. There's you and me, there's this tree, the oak tree, which is different from that oak tree, and is different from the elder over there. What he's saying, though, is that the individual is not separate. So he's saying there's no separation between individuals. There's an interconnectedness, there's a web. This is what's known as the teaching of dependent origination, the Praticca-Samuppada. And it's also the meaning of emptiness as well, because the Mahayana schools ran with that, because the Buddha did say that dependent origination is the most profound teaching that he has given. Then he said, one who fully sees into the dependent origination sees the Dharma itself, and he who sees the Dharma sees dependent origination. So it absolutely goes, this all goes together. So emptiness simply means emptiness of self. It doesn't mean nothing or void, as we've said many times. It means emptiness of self, and in the absence of a separate self, there is just dependent origination. There's just interconnectedness. There's just that schema of the 18 Dhatu, and the 18 Dhatu doesn't belong to anybody. It is actually, if you like, it's just a map of the mind. It's a map of the way things really are. So yes, at this point, outside and inside all break down, because if everything is interconnected, where does one thing end and another thing begin? The eye discerns differences. My eye can discern the difference between the table and the floor, but the table is standing on the floor, and if it wasn't for the floor, the table would not be there. And this is the same for everything. So I see the shirt on my own back, for example, and someone comes up and takes the shirt off my back, as the saying puts it. And I say, oi, that's my shirt, because my eye and my understanding discerns the shirt as a separate reality, an entity in itself. But the shirt is not an entity in itself. At one time there was no shirt. It's cotton, the shirt I'm wearing, so it was part of a plant at one time. And then through a process it becomes a shirt, but that shirt wasn't on my back. It was in another part of the world, and then it gets transported here, and then I buy it, and then I'm wearing it. And today, as I'm giving this talk, it so happened that when I was getting dressed, this shirt was chosen and put on. Otherwise, if I didn't choose this shirt, even if it was in the drawer in the bedroom, it would have been another shirt that was being worn, and that would have been the shirt that came off my back. So, as it were, this shirt has a story. doesn't it? It has a story that, as it moves through time, and at some point it will be destroyed. It will fall apart or whatever. Maybe it'll be turned into rags first, but then at some point the elements will decompose, as will the wearer as well. So everything has a story of interdependence. And, I may say, well, I own this shirt, but if the time comes for a thing to fall apart, then that's part of its story. We tend to see the object as an entity in itself. And I say, well, what can I do to stop these changes actually happening? Well, in the Buddhist realm, nothing, because they will happen anyway. It's a little bit like the story of the young temple boy who, whilst he's dusting one day in the temple, he manages to knock off one of the temple valuables, which is a little teacup, which is very ancient and extremely precious, and the cup falls onto the floor and smashes. And the boy picks it up and holds it behind his back and goes through to the master and says, "Master," he says, you always teach that everything is impermanent." "Yes," he said, "this is what our Lord the Buddha taught us, and that everything comes to be, has a duration, and then ceases to be." "Yes," he said, "this is the teaching of the Buddha, the teaching of impermanence." And the boy brings out the broken pieces and says, "Unfortunately, the cup has reached the end of its existence." So you can always try that if need be. Anyway, the point is that everything does have this story of coming to be and ceasing to be, if you like, and transformation, which is why also in Buddhism, certainly in Zen anyway, in my own tradition, we often use the term undergoing transformation when someone is dying. And someone says, "Oh, when did so-and-so undergo transformation?" "Oh, yes, that was last year." So in this way, things don't come and go. Well, there is no actual coming and going. There's just transformation. So you have a candle, you light it. That's the first transformation. It's left burning for a while. Perhaps it burns all the way down, and then once the wax has been used up, it goes out. And that's so you could ask, well, where did the flame come from? Did it come from another realm? Did it come from the well of souls? And when it becomes extinguished, does it go to heaven? Does it go on to one of the other realms? Maybe it's in one of the hell realms if it's been a bad flame. I don't know. But actually, what we have is just things undergoing transformation, coming to be and ceasing to be. And I always remember, again, Yoko saying very close towards the end of her life, she said, forms come and go. By forms, she means like the candle flame. It comes and then it goes. She said, but life, that goes on. And by life, she was referring to life with a capital L, with this greater life. As it were, because the question is, if everything's undergoing transformation, then what is it that is undergoing transformation? Well, this is what's known as the true self, or the true nature. But it's not actually a thing. Again, it can't be a thing, because if it was a thing, then it would have a definite shape. And if it was a definite shape, that would mean it couldn't be any other shape that it was not. But this life becomes all things. It undergoes all the transformations and becomes everything. So therefore, it is formless in itself. Life itself is formless. Again, Miyakoni used to liken it using an analogy of wine. So, we know, those who drink wine will know what is meant by the body of a wine. But the body of a wine is not separate from the wine itself, yet it is distinct, and one can taste it. It's a quality. Anyway, so there we are. So yes, so on this then, so we have these two consciousnesses, or these two words for consciousness, for example, sense consciousness, vijnana, and also awareness, sati, as well. And he goes and he explains how these faculties of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling are not mine. They are functioning already because of the interconnectedness, because of dependent origination, and that this this functioning, if you like, is of the Buddha. This is what's known as the heart Buddha, which is neither inside nor outside. It's neither small nor large, because those are all forms, obviously. And it's all those things too. So every one of us is Buddha, he says. Yes, of course. How could it not be? Our eyes are the eyes of the Buddha. Our ears are the ears of the Buddha. The delusion is in making them mine. And this is why he says, however, Mr. So-and-so is not Buddha. In other words, Martin isn't Buddha. Martin is a label that's attached to something that actually at root is Buddha. He says, but our persons are Buddha. And by this, he refers to the whole, or to the living organism in its environment, and its environment too. And this is something that's very similar to a saying of Master Rinzai. So in one of Master Rinzai's saying, he says, what do you understand by the supernormal powers of the Buddha? And he said the Buddha, it was claimed in the early teachings, had supernormal powers. And then he says, but the great demon king, who in fighting Shiva hid his 500 troops and himself inside the stalk of a piece of grass, inside the hollow, inside the stalk of a piece of grass, he said he had supernormal powers, but he wasn't the Buddha. So what are the supernormal powers? The Buddha said the supernormal powers are the real supernormal powers, he said. And that is in the eye, not to be deceived by form and colour. In the ear, not to be deceived by sounds. In the body, not to be deceived by tactile sensations. In the nose, not to be deceived by smells. And in the tongue, not to be deceived by tastes. And in the heart, not to be deceived by mental configurations. These are the supernormal powers of the Buddha, and only a Buddha has them. And what is that deceit? It is the deceit that all those things belong to me. That's the deceit. And then he goes on, Sokyan this is. The Buddhist believes in a pantheistic God. We have monotheism, we have polytheism, and we have pantheism. So what's the difference? So monotheism refers to usually a creator God, such as in Judeo-Christianity and also in Islam. And this God is transcendent, that is, he lives outside of creation. And as a creator God, he creates creation as an object, but he lives outside of it himself. The other is that you can have polytheism, so instead of having one god, you have multiple gods and goddesses. That's a bit like Roman religion or Greek religion in ancient times. But again, their creation is not themselves, it's an object. So they live on Mount Olympus, for example, and they create creation, and everything that's in it. So that's quite similar. Then you get pantheism. So pantheism, instead of the god or deity or spiritual power being transcendent, that is separate and outside of creation, it is what's called immanent, which means that it's actually in creation itself. So not only is the spiritual power creating the plant, it is also to be found in the plant as well. And when I say to be found, I mean that quite loosely. It's not that you can cut open a plant and sort of extract, as it were, the deity from the plant. Certainly not without killing the plant anyway. And once you've killed the plant, then the deity has vanished from it already, because it's immanent. So there is transcendence, and there is this immanence as well. And pantheism is often, so the sorts of sayings that are associated with are things like probably best highlighted in that classic story of the Maharaja's elephant. So about the young Chela, the young boy, he's been apprenticed to the guru, and the guru is been teaching his students, and the boy overhears the guru saying, says, well, yes, he says, all things are God. This is the truth. All things are God. I am God. You are God. Everything is God. And the boy goes up to him afterwards and he said, is that true? I am God? He said, yes. He said, you are God. I am God. We are all God. And this completely blows the boy's mind. And he sort of goes out and I am God. You are God. Everyone is God. And this really wafts him up. It really sort of goes in and resonates with him. And he's walking down the high street, and at the far end, coming towards him, is the Maharaja's elephant, decked out in all its finery, and the mahouts sitting on top, shouting, out of the way, out of the way. Here comes the Maharaja's elephant. And the boy looks at the elephant walking towards him and says, I am God, you are God. Does God get out of the way of God? Doesn't make sense. We're all God. We're all one. And out of the way, out of the way. Here comes the Maharaja's elephant. I am God. You are God. Does God get out of the way of God? Out of the way, he says. And just at that moment, as the elephant comes upon him, the trunk of the elephant snakes its way around the boy, around his body, lifts him up and deposits him safely into the ditch by the side of the road. And the young boy's deeply shaken by this experience, because how is this possible? If we are all God. So he rushes back to the guru and explains what has happened. He said, how is it possible if I am God and you are God and the elephant was God, that God should get out of the way of God? And the guru says, but did you not hear the voice of God saying, get out of the way? That too is God. So there's a right way or a wrong way to understand, these pantheism as well. And it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't change the world. In another, it completely changes the world, because it can change our relationship to it as well. And this is something, that really we can get into with our practice. And this is, again, with our daily life practice. When we talk about setting up a daily life practice, the giving myself wholeheartedly into what at this moment is being done, and we have the timetable and all these things. But be careful, it can become very mechanistic. It can be very much sort of, I'm doing my practice, my zazen and all this. But this isn't what it's about. We forget ourselves into the practice, and then something happens, something appears. Suddenly, instead of being in a world of myself and other, suddenly we're in a realm of participation, and this realm of participation is taken as the reality. This is what the truth in fact actually is. And suddenly things start speaking to us, as well as we are acting, this organism's acting in the world is also acting on us as well. And there's, that lovely bit in the story of the Grimm's fairy tale of Mother Holle. I won't go through the whole thing. It's quite a long story and you can always look it up. But when the girl goes down into the sort of fairy realm, and there she is in this magical world, and she's walking along and she sees a tree that's heavily laden with apples. And the tree calls to her saying, shake me, or my apples will break me. And so she feels sorry for the tree, so she rushes over and said, yes, of course. And she shakes the tree and the apples come down. She collects them all together and the tree says, thank you very much. And then she goes by a little cottage, and a voice comes out of the oven and say, take us out, otherwise we'll burn. And she goes in and she sees that opens the oven door, and there's on a tray are some loaves of bread. And oh, thank you. She takes them out and puts them on the top and closes the door and goes out. This is that relationship with things. Suddenly, we walk in to the living room, we see that there's, a plate down by the side of the sofa, and because we're present, because we're at one with the circumstances, the plate calls out to us saying, but I'm in the wrong place. and I'm dirty, and I've been left here too long. Help. And so we pick the plate up and we go through and we either scrape it off or wash it or put it in the dishwasher, and so on. Or we see the plant that is just now drooping. We don't have to think about it. Just go and get the watering can and just water it. But we're alive to the circumstances. We're alive to the needs of the circumstances. And this is the Buddha heart. This is the Buddha heart acting in total. And it's a very different way of living. There's no loneliness in that life. Even if one was the only human being around, there's no loneliness in that life. Because one is constantly participating in it. And so we'll leave it there for now. As I say, a great book. It's quite difficult to get hold of, the Zenite. It's out of print and quite expensive, but if you do manage to get hold of it, personally I think it's well worth it. Okay, we'll leave it there until the next time.